feel free to turn your camera off. And that is fine. Okay, hopefully you can see the slides. Great. Y'all, this is my first webinar I've ever hosted, so thank you for learning with me as we go. Well, hi, and welcome to the PFAS Solutions panel tonight. Although we're hopeful that the majority of the evening we're going to talk about solutions, I also want to take a really brief moment here in the beginning to just set the stage for the conversation that we'll be having by introducing what PFAS are for those of you that, like me, have only very recently started learning about this issue. So per and polyfluoroalkyl substances are a large group of man-made chemicals. They're resistant to heat, water, and oil. Therefore, they've been really widely used in decades for their thermal and chemical stability, their resistance to water, stain resistance, and their surfactant nature, which gives them many industrial and consumer uses. They're everywhere in items like carpeting, waterproof clothing, upholstery, personal care products such as makeup, firefighting foams, and metal plating. They're still very widely used today. They've been classified by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency as an emerging contaminant. They've been found in multiple locations across the United States, as well as many locations in North Carolina. They've been found both in the environment and in blood samples of the general U.S. population. They are persistent, which is a word that means they do not break down in the environment. And for those of you that are life science and earth science, AP environmental science teachers in the house, they also bioaccumulate, which is a heavy buzzword, at least in an APES classroom. And that means that the amount builds up over time in the blood and organs. So studies in animals who were exposed to PFAS found links between these chemicals and increased cholesterol, changes in hormones in the immune system, decreased fertility, increased risk of cancers, certain cancers. Studies in which animals were given high levels of PFAS showed effects including how low birth weight, delayed puberty onset, elevated cholesterol levels, and reduced immunologic responses. These animal studies have helped scientists understand what could happen in people. Additional human studies, like the massive human health study conducted in Parkersburg, showed a direct correlation between PFAS exposure in humans and testicular cancer, kidney cancer, heart disease, kidney disease, thyroid disease, ulcerative colitis, pregnancy-induced hypertension, and preeclampsia. So multiple federal agencies, state agencies, local agencies are working to conduct investigations to identify areas and sources of PFAS contamination and ensure appropriate public health responses to this issue. And that includes everyone who you're going to hear from tonight. And that's really why we're here tonight. My name is Jenna. I'm a former high school classroom science teacher, and I'm now working on a project called Idea Learners alongside multiple colleagues here tonight. The design team is part of that program. They are making lessons around this topic. And also there are colleagues here from UNC-Chapel Hill's Center for Public Engagement with Science. And we all believe that education is a promising approach to solutions, and that what you as teachers do makes a difference every day. So tonight we're brought together all the teachers that are on the design team, as well as the following panelists, so that we can learn about approaches to PFAS solutions together. The structure for tonight's panel will be that each panelist will have a few minutes to introduce themselves in the order shown on your screen here, and then answer the same two questions. And then we'll ask a couple of additional questions before we open it up for some audience Q&A. We know time is everyone's most precious commodity, so we thank you for taking a little bit of your time to be here with us tonight. Our panelists are Kristen Chung, Dana Sargent, Emily Sutton, and Todd Taylor. I'll do a brief bio for each of them, and then they'll answer the questions that you can see on the slides here. Those are, and I think Dana, I think we can put them in the chat for the panelists to see so that we don't have to repeat those. But just what is your current work on PFAS, and how does your work contribute to solving this problem? And we're going to start with Christian. And I'll take this off so you can all see Christian. All right. Christian Chung is a junior double majoring in biology and public policy and minoring in environmental science and studies at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He also works as an undergraduate research assistant in the Coronell research group, where he uses hydrologic and chemical analyses to study how water absorbs PFAS and to evaluate the policy implications PFAS have on public access to safe drinking water and environmental standards. Christian recently traveled to Egypt last fall, where he served as a youth delegate at the COP27 United Nations Framework on Climate Change Convention. While there, Chung attended high-level policy negotiations and symposiums representing youth, the state of North Carolina, he's from Waxhaw, and UNC-Chapel Hill. Chung is also highly engaged in campus life at UNC-Chapel Hill, serving in leadership positions in the Phi Alpha Delta fraternity, the UNC Mixed Asian Student Heritage Organization, and the North Carolina Collaboratory, and the Data-Driven Enviro Lab. And hopefully he will also tell us how he has enough time in the day to do all of these amazing things. So thank you so much for being here. And we're really, really looking forward to hearing from you tonight.
Thank you for having me. Yes, and minimal sleep.
It sounds like it.
But my current work with PFAS, so I have about 2 roles on campus that I fulfill. And one of them, as Jenna just mentioned, is that I am an undergraduate research assistant for the Coronell research group. And I've served in that role for about 1.5 years now. It's based out of the Gilling School of Global Public Health. And so within that role, I study like a various range of topic areas. And so within that lab itself, it's a environmental science and engineering lab. And so I specifically study water chemistry and the relevant parameters specifically for PFAS behavior in aqueous systems, so water systems, as well as hydraulic systems, which would be pertinent for water treatment facilities that use hydraulic pumps and other mechanisms within those areas. And then I also study PFAS behavior and performance of sorbents. So basically the materials that water treatment facilities use to purify or treat various water matrices for remediation. And specifically now, my research project has been investigating how water parameters and properties influence PFAS behavior and adsorption. So basically that like technical term for treatment for the performance of granular and ion exchange remediation and purification technology. And so that's like a little bit of my bench work. So lab grade work. And then I also serve as an environmental policy intern for the North Carolina Collaboratory. And so that's basically just like a science policy think tank that collaborates with the North Carolina General Assembly to tackle any sort of like relevant science policy issue or public health issue that is concerning the state of North Carolina. And so within that role, I kind of evaluate and look at a lot of federal and state policies regarding PFAS legislation. And I've also served within this role for about 1.5 years now. And I particularly look at funding streams for PFAS research, as well as funding streams for remediation methods and alternatives to PFAS. I also look at the general regulations of PFAS classification and like how they go about designating what PFAS are hazardous, what aren't deemed as hazardous, as well as like just the ones that have been phased out, as well as looking at innovative remediation methods. And more recently, I've started looking at PFAS destruction methods after they've been treated in water facilities. And so all of this work is dictated through the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, as well as the General Assembly. And yeah, that's a little bit about my background. And so particularly with the work that I do in these roles, I work on a specific project called NC Pure, which is a state-funded water treatment technology project. And so I particularly contribute water characterization experiments. And so for that project, it basically is, the overall goal of it is to optimize and develop a novel sorbent material that my principal investigator, Orlando Coronell, in collaboration with Frank Lebfarth, he's from the Department of Chemistry at UNC. They've kind of collaborated and created a novel resin sorbent that is capable of selectively targeting PFAS for removal from water treatment facilities. So that's like relatively new material, because as of late, like a lot of treatment facilities just stick to baseline like remediation methods that don't necessarily selectively target PFAS, which again is why there's such like a high issue with their environmental persistence. And so, like I said, I conduct those water characterization materials. And so that basically looks at how either surface water, groundwater, well water, wastewater, how those implications of the water chemistry itself will impact the performance of the resin. And so, yeah, basically the whole overall goal of that project is to, in the future, optimize and scale up that technology so it's capable of being implemented in North Carolina water treatment facilities.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It sounds like your projects are tackling solutions from every angle. So it's really neat to hear how multifaceted that is.
Yes, it's a very like interdisciplinary approach.
Great. And I'm sure Todd Taylor, when we get to him, will be able to speak about scaling up to treatment facilities. So really cool stuff. Thank you so much. All right, next we have Dana Sargent. Dana earned a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism from San Diego State University and a Master of Science in Environmental Sciences and Policy from the Johns Hopkins University. She worked in communications for a large nonprofit out of DC for 13 years, moved to Wilmington in 2013 with the intention of transforming her career to align with her passion for the environment. She began volunteering throughout the community and writing freelance and was soon invited to chair the Cape Fear River Watch Advocacy Committee before being elected to the board of directors. Cape Fear River Watch then hired her to manage an outreach campaign on water quality issues, including Gen X and industrial agriculture. She's honored to have been hired in January 2019 to serve as the executive director at this small organization that does huge things. She loves music and her two magnificent daughters. Dana, thank you for being here with us tonight. Again, the two questions are, what is your current work on PFAS? And how does your work contribute to solving this problem, which feels like you're going to knock that one out of the park. So thank you so much for being here.
I mean, I guess in the land of advocacy, we're nothing if not hopeful. So yeah, hopefully the work that we're doing is affecting change. My work on PFAS really centers around a lot around the consent order, which is a document that came about after Cape Fear River Watch sued this company, Chemours, who is responsible for most of the contamination in the Cape Fear. Excuse me. And we sued the DEQ, the State Department of Environmental Quality. That culminated in this consent order, which was signed in 2019, and Cape Fear River Watch is a party to it. So a lot of my work involves the oversight of that, specifically currently, and Christian, I'd love to talk with you about this. A lot of work on the well owners is where my work has been focused over the last couple months relative to the consent order, along with all the other things involved in the consent order. Besides that, a lot of communications, outreach, community engagement, and legal work. So we have a lawsuit. We sued the EPA. Unfortunately, not something we wanted to do, but we filed a petition to force the company Chemours under the Toxic Substances Control Act to fund some health studies and an epidemiological study in our region. And the EPA effectively denied the petition. So we ended up suing them. We have that lawsuit. We're also, excuse me, we're intervening in Chemours' case against the EPA. They filed a case against the EPA to basically question the EPA's most recent health advisory level for Gen X, and we've been granted intervention into that case, working on that, as well as multiple other partnerships relative to researchers. We partner with NC State on the Gen X Health Exposure Study, as well as several members of the collaboratory that Christian was talking about on a community sort of engagement piece on that, which I partner with Emily Sutton on. And then, there's so much work in terms of advocacy on this issue. We meet regularly in terms of North Carolina advocates. There's a ton of us meeting regularly and talking over legislative, regulatory approaches, community engagement. So that's kind of the basics. Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Great, thank you so much. I can't wait to hear you all talk to each other as we get going here. It sounds like there's a lot of crossover. Next up, we have Emily Sutton. Emily joined the staff of the Haw River Assembly in 2016, managing citizen science projects to watchdog against sediment pollution and monitor the tributaries and main stem of the Haw River. As Riverkeeper, she is now leading the fight against pollution in the Haw River on many fronts, including emerging contaminants, Jordan Lake nutrients, and sediment pollution. Emily grew up paddling rivers in the Midwest and moved to North Carolina to receive her Bachelor's of Arts at Appalachian State University in Sustainable Development, where she studied agroecology, watershed ecology, and outdoor education. Emily lives in Durham, North Carolina. Emily, thank you so much for being here with us. Do you need me to repeat the questions or you got them?
Oh, I got them.
All right.
Yeah, thank you so much for organizing this, Jenna. This is great. I, like Dana mentioned, I get to work with Dana and other river keepers across the state. There's so many PFAS advocates across the state that are really fighting for effective change in whatever means we can get it. So the way that my work, that I interact with PFAS compounds is Haw River Assembly was a part of a study back in 2012 to look at biosolids or sludge applications. So these are the solids that come from wastewater treatment plants. And from that initial study, we discovered that there were PFOA and PFAS in extremely high levels in very rural streams. And so we discovered that those levels were coming from solids from wastewater treatment plants, and especially coming from the wastewater treatment plant in the city of Burlington. So from that research, we were able to further look at levels in the Haw River and in tributaries and streams throughout the watershed with the help from some amazing academic researchers at Duke University and NC State, as well as some folks from EPA. That initial study, that was before I worked at Haw River Assembly. So this has been a legacy of toxic pollution in the Haw River watershed coming from these specific industries in the city of Burlington. So after the news about Chemours broke in Wilmington, we were able to work with those same scientists and that same team of lawyers to really pinpoint what the sources are within the Haw River watershed. So we monitored upstream and downstream of every suspected source and found that the drinking water in the town of Pittsboro was at extremely high levels of PFAS. For reference, the health guidance for the EPA for these two legacy compounds, PFOA and PFAS, are 0.004 parts per trillion and 0.02 parts per trillion for those two compounds. Levels in Pittsboro were over 1,200 parts per trillion in their finished drinking water. So this was a huge concern, and we were working towards finding that source within the watershed. We found that it was the city of Burlington. The wastewater treatment plant was receiving industrial pollution, industrial wastewater from all of these different facilities. So we filed a notice of intent to sue along Southern Environmental Law Centers, who worked with us on that. We filed that notice in November of 2019. And since then, we are still negotiating a settlement right now to hold those polluters accountable. But we have identified the 3 sources within the system. So a little bit different from Dana's case of Chemours, there is a city that is receiving all of these industrial sources of pollution. And we had to work for 3 years now to pinpoint what those sources are within the system. So now that we have identified those sources, they're moving towards a closed loop system and working on eliminating those sources completely at the source. I'm kind of blending the both of the questions together here, but a lot of the other work that we do on PFAS is permits. So because we know that these pollutants in the Haw River watershed are coming from wastewater treatment plants, we are constantly watching for those discharge permits that we can push the state to have harder regulations on, which they have authority right now to have stricter regulations on. So we're pushing them to use their existing authority to protect community members downstream. We have also been the resource for the community in Pittsboro. So I'm fortunate enough to have a lot of community advocates in Pittsboro. Clean Haw River is one of our community groups there, and they knock on doors and send letters, and we hold public hearings, and we hold all the information sessions that we possibly can to let people know that their water was contaminated and what the solutions are for them. Since then, July of last year, the town of Pittsboro has installed a granular activated carbon system, and it's bringing the levels that we once saw down by 95%. So it's not perfect, but it's pretty dang good. So the work now is that we are always going to continue to minimize the pollution at the source, eliminate it at the source when possible, but minimization is better than nothing. So right now we're looking at City of Burlington, City of Greensboro, and City of Reedsville. Those are our three major PFAS sources within the watershed. And that is, like Dana said, through legislative action and through regulatory action. And then it's bringing those impacted communities together and making sure that their voices are heard.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Great. So to round out our introductions, we have Todd Taylor here with us. And Todd has 23 plus years of progressively responsible experience operating and managing public water and wastewater utilities. In July 2020, Todd became the executive director of the Orange Water and Sewer Authority, OWASA, which provides water, wastewater, and reclaimed water services to the towns of Chapel Hill and Carrboro and to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. For nearly 7 years prior to that promotion, he held the position of OWASA's General Manager of Operations. He is a licensed professional engineer in the state of North Carolina and Virginia and holds water and wastewater treatment operator licenses. Todd has a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Bluefield State College and a Master of Business Administration degree from Wake Forest University. Todd, I feel like you already know all of the other panelists. Do you all know each other already? Everything. I feel like your sector really cross-cuts all the work here.
A time or two.
Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here. My perspective on this is a little bit different than everybody else's. I would say that me and my team are on the front lines of protecting communities, our communities that we serve, and the environment from an array of harmful substances each and every day. If we don't do our jobs, people get sick, schools and businesses can't open, and the environment gets polluted. We've been monitoring PFAS in our water sources of drinking water since 2018. And while we have found some PFAS in our water sources, until recently, our treatment process has been effective at reducing PFAS below health advisory levels. Last year, the EPA lowered those levels and triggered us to reevaluate our monitoring program and explore options for additional treatment. And these efforts are ongoing. I think our work and investments in monitoring and treating drinking water for PFAS will be instrumental in reducing our customers' exposure to these harmful substances.
Thank you so much, everyone, for those introductions. That was really, really great, just great information to hear from all these different sectors. We have a couple questions, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A from the attendees. So attendees, feel free to start putting any questions you might have into the chat, and we'll be able to send those forward. One that we'd like to start with, I think you've all already talked about this in such a wonderful way, but it's almost like we have to know thy enemy before we can approach solutions. So what do you see to be the biggest challenge in mitigating PFAS exposure in your area of work? And what could be a solution to that specific challenge? And Todd, if it's okay, I'd like to start with you and maybe go in reverse order to how we introduced.
Sure. I would say the biggest challenge for us is funding. These treatment facilities are not inexpensive and will require millions of dollars worth of infrastructure. And the solution to that is the polluters should be held accountable. This is not the responsibility of our current customer base to pay for all this, or something that that has been put upon them. So our feeling is, there's minimal funding out there available for a utility like ours to implement these kinds of changes.
Dana, you want to go ahead?
I thought we were going in reverse order, so Emily was out. I was just waiting for her.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you're right. My bad.
I'll jump in. I'll take the heat, Dana.
Sure, go for
I
it.
mean, I agree with Todd completely. The reduction at the source is the way to solve this, and polluters should be held accountable. And by that, I also mean financially. It is not the responsibility of these small utilities downstream to pay for these extremely costly treatment systems. So in order to do that, it has to be, I mean, these are major corporations that we're talking about that have the financial capital to do this work. And just logistically, it's a lot easier to treat these things at the source before it goes to, in my case, a wastewater treatment plant where they're treating, 100,000 gallons a day versus 6 million gallons a day. And so reducing it at the source before it ever goes to the wastewater treatment plant also eliminates it from being in the biosolids. So your question was, what's the biggest obstacle? And it's that these industries have to be held accountable to pay for treatment, or it has to be costly enough that it's not cost effective to use these toxic substances in the first place.
Yeah, and I think at the risk of being redundant, I agree with both of those comments, and I'll just take it one step in the past, prior to those things happening, the regulatory framework needs to be changed, right? So we're talking about filtration and we're talking about stopping at the source. Before that, these chemicals should have never been manufactured and emitted or discharged into the environment to begin with. And so at this point, Chemours is requesting an expansion of PFAS manufacturing at their facility at Fayetteville Works, when they should be discussing research and development for alternatives to PFAS. If there are essential needs that the public is necessitating for the manufacture of these chemicals, we can, we're a really innovative bunch of humans on this planet, and I can guarantee that we can make products that do what PFAS does that also don't kill people, right? So if Chemours at this point is using a lot of greenwashing and claiming they need to expand so that they can, because of green cell technology, we need green energy, so we need more PFAS to do that. I question that. Their claim is that they have the best chemists on the planet. Those chemists should be able to create green cell technology that also doesn't kill people. And so our regulatory framework, the EPA, works backwards. There's a lot of countries in the world that follow what's called the precautionary principle, which is that corporations have to prove a chemical is safe before it is put into the environment. Here in America, it's the opposite. Chemical companies create and manufacture things, put them into the environment, and then what has to happen is that people have to figure out that they're getting sick. How does that happen? People get sick, people die, and then they say, oh wait, maybe we should study these chemicals. And then that takes years, right? We're looking at 50 years of these industries understanding the toxic nature of these chemicals, 50 years of the own industry scientists inside these buildings where these chemicals are being made, telling their bosses that they're toxic, and we're still producing them. And now we're actually having conversations, fighting with Chemours and pressuring the DEQ to not allow them to actually expand. So it needs to be stopped at the source, but that spigot of manufacturing needs to be turned off as well. We can't keep filtering and putting it on the folks at the downstream, or even saying, let's create more filtration at the source. We have to stop that spigot of release, and that means not using these chemicals anymore. Thanks.
Yeah, and I completely agree with everything that everybody else has said. I think the key issue would be funding delegations, because PFAS within themselves already have a long history of like environmental persistence, manufacturing, and that comes down to legacy PFAS versus emerging PFAS, and how those two, with the prior contamination and like already existing widespread contaminations, there's now the emergence of new PFAS like Gen X, which again, chemers being left unchecked is a key issue of just like ongoing persistence and continued persistence. But I really do think it comes down to adequate and like effective coordination between all stakeholders involved. So whether that be just like the communities that are impacted, government, private sector entities, like anybody across the board, just ensuring that everybody is communicating their own needs and wants within the situation. So everything in its entirety can be checked among all types of like across the board in general. And like I said, with widespread PFAS contamination and existing PFAS contamination with legacy PFAS, there needs to be sort of like a checks and balances system for whether or not these emerging contaminants will pose more of a threat, which as they've shown already do. So just being more aware and coordinating efforts a lot better between government and communities as well, I think is an issue that should be observed.
That's a great point, Christian. And you have a lot of experience, I think, on the policy side of things, and a part of these groups that are really cross-disciplinary, tackling issues. And, you know, I mean, this might put you too much on the spot, but what do you think that type of cross-sector collaboration would look like? Is it already happening in North Carolina? And what could we do to support more efforts in that vein?
Well, yes, I would say North Carolina is very unique because we have like the collaboratory within itself is one of those unique problem-solving models, because it connects like government public agencies with private or academic institutions. So for example, like the NC Pure project that connects academia with like North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, like researchers, as well as the policymakers and advisors who advise like the General Assembly on making decisions and passing laws. So I think there's like already been a push in the right direction in North Carolina because of that unique statutory framework that we have. But it's also relevant in the sense that North Carolina itself, not like it's across like federal borders or anything like that, but or across other state borders, North Carolina is unique for this, but it's better tailored. All of the concerns, issues are recorded from like across the state. And so it's better tailored to address those kind of issues. So like in regard to PFAS and ongoing PFAS contamination in Wilmington, or just like any new findings of PFAS contamination across the state, it creates more of a centralized network for addressing those needs, while also just gathering more data about PFAS itself, because again, PFAS has been a decade-long issue, but now it's just recently surfacing about all of the environmental and public health detriments. So I think the data collection process is also really key, because it gives the state a chance to sort of figure out long-term goals in the future. But I definitely do think there needs to be more of a connection between research, legislation, and overall like advocacy and community members, just to adequately and effectively address the problem across the state.
Thanks. And that same question is open to anyone else, if anyone else wants to jump in on that one.
I can't remember what the question was.
Oh, just what he was mentioning, you know, these cross-sector collaborations, and I asked, what do you think that would look like in an ideal situation? And what does it currently look like in North Carolina?
Well, I mean, I can speak a little bit to that. So Emily and I work collaboratively, I would say daily, with, researchers, legislators, regulatory agencies, community members, community activists, and utilities. I just had lunch with utilities yesterday, or this afternoon. I had meetings with DEQ yesterday, and like, this is just an ongoing daily thing. And I think the collaboratory, we love science, and the collaboratory is a great thing for North Carolina. Those scientists are very much involved with our work. I've got most of them on text that I'm constantly, bothering them with questions. And so I'm really grateful for our researchers here in North Carolina. I think Christian was alluding to this. We are lucky to have so many amazing researchers in this state working on this issue. And they're not just researchers researching for the sake of research. These folks give a damn, excuse my French, and it is clear and evident from just the work that they do and the heart they put into it and the time that they spend on this. And Emily and I partner with several of them on different aspects of our work relative to community engagement and community outreach, to make sure that we know that what we're sharing with the public is accurate and based on science. And that's a huge deal. There's no need to overblow the dangers of PFAS. So from my perspective, my background is in journalism, we want to be accurate as can be, tell the truth about it. It's bad enough. The truth is bad enough on this. And so to get people enraged and active, and that's unfortunate, but that's the truth. And so, yeah, I'm grateful for this, the collaborations that we have. I think there's always room for more collaborations, always room for meeting new people and figuring out different ways that we can all work together on this, including the educator community. I'm really grateful for you all for holding this, because I think there is a gap there with our young folks not being able to have access to information on this issue that is really global now.
Thanks, Dana. And that's a really nice segue to another one of the questions we want to ask, which is, you just said it, you're speaking to a room of educators from across the state that interact on a daily basis with young people. So how do you see spaces for young people or community groups to become involved with this issue, or even support the work that each of you are doing individually? And anyone can take that one.
I'll jump in first. One of the collaborations that Dana mentioned is having different voices and different types of people asking for the same thing. I mean, Christian also talked about working with legislative members, and Dana and I talk to legislative members all the time too. They get tired of hearing from us because they already know what we're going to say before we walk into the room. And so I cannot stress the value of talking to your representative. There are right now 3, maybe 4 representatives in the House and Senate in North Carolina that we can reliably count on to put forward PFAS legislation every single session, and it doesn't move. And it's because this is unfortunately a very partisan issue. So if we have other voices that are not just the environmental movement, the environmental advocates pushing for this work, because it affects every single one of us. It's our drinking water, it's the fish that we consume, it's the deer and the ducks that people hunt. I mean, it impacts every single person in this state. So to make this an issue of higher concern, we need everyone to be paying attention to this and to be talking to their representatives, talking to their families over dinner. I mean, talking to their students. This is already such a great step. So yeah, just having those conversations and educating more people and letting people know that if they're an elected official and they're not taking action to protect their communities, then that's a problem, and people are going to notice that.
I agree. I think advocacy is the key for this, for getting people in community groups to get involved. I mean, there needs to be more funding for research, testing, treatment, disposal solutions, all those things that are needed, and just doesn't seem to get as much interest as it should and attention.
I agree. Kind of from like the advocacy standpoint, just like me and my own age background, I think anything specifically pertaining to the environment is like highly generational, because young people are going to inherit it after countless generations, and like the cycle continues. So if you, like, for example, like deplete one resource, that ruins it for the whole next generation and everybody else to follow. And so like the same kind of thought process can be applied to any sort of PFAS, like widespread PFAS contamination or issue, like the Cape Fear, for example. And if you have these chemicals continuously, like bioaccumulating and persistent in critical infrastructure components like clean drinking water systems, then eventually that resource will cease all like viability and won't be usable in the future. So I think there should be a bigger push for educating younger people, because even like I can speak from my own experience in 2017 when Chemours had the spill in the Cape Fear River Basin. I had no idea that that was even an issue to begin with. And I was not fully exposed to PFAS as an issue until I'd say my freshman year of undergrad. So I think starting it early with fueling that sort of education system and curriculum into high school classrooms is like of the utmost importance if you truly want to bring about future changes, because it only can happen if people know about it.
Great, thank y'all. I think the whole room here would probably agree with you as being educational advocates. So we're grateful for the shout out. Thank you for that. We have some design team teachers, the folks, Christian, kind of that you were just mentioning, that are working on building these lesson plans right now. They're in the room. So I'd like to open it up to them first. If any of them have a question, they should be able to come off camera. And then otherwise we'll open up for more questions from the audience.
Hi, I'm Abria. I don't think I'm able to use the video. But yeah, I'm happy to ask a question too. Seeing the work like that Christian is doing with his research lab, I was wondering about what motivated you to kind of pursue that area of research, and for the rest of the panelists, your particular area of expertise, kind of what motivated you, so that we can hopefully kind of share that same excitement with our students to consider these fields.
Hi. So for me specifically, I kind of came into undergrad wanting to pursue something within the natural sciences. Originally, it was thought to be in the healthcare field, but then I kind of diverged away from that and started exploring other options. And so the beginning of my sophomore year, I stepped on to be originally a volunteer for a grassroots organization called Toxic Free Future. And they had a specific campaign in Raleigh that was aimed at phasing out PFAS from food packaging. And so that was my first exposure to PFAS as an issue, and like learned about all of the relevance that it had in North Carolina specifically. And kind of just like my own passions for like environmental preservation and stuff, that kind of like piqued my interest, because I got to learn about the complexity of PFAS as in terms of its own appliances to like multiple facets of everyday life, and just like the chemistry kind of fascinated me as well. And so with exposure on that project, I grew more fascinated with it, and then eventually just sought out other roles where I could learn more and like be able to apply the knowledge that I learned. Also, but overall, like I am very passionate about this issue, and I've grown to become very passionate about this issue. So not just like from intellectual curiosity point of view, but just like I have learned about like a lot more just through the experiences that I've had through it, with everything that I've done.
Thanks.
There's a question from Julia Little in Fayetteville. If we have PFAS in wells, are there substances, chemicals that we can pump into the aquifer to trap and bind the PFAS and then pump back out? Or this might also get to filters that someone could install in their home. I didn't know if someone could speak to what well owners might do who have a PFAS contamination issue.
Sure that Todd and Christian can talk a lot relative to their expertise on filtration, but relative to Fayetteville area well owners and the consent order, I can speak to the fact that the consent order is requiring Chemours to pay for well sampling outward of the facility until they reach non-detect. They have not yet reached non-detect. And it's been more than 9,000 wells showing levels of contamination that require filtration. The consent order requires Chemours to pay for different types of water options to provide people depending on their levels. And this gets very weeded, and I don't think we should get into it now, but I'm happy to provide a lot more information on the side. I've had to do deep dives into filtration myself, but there's several that they're providing. Reverse osmosis under sink, which to me is not enough. We have a lot of issues with dermal exposure. We have issues with folks being concerned about watering their gardens, bathing their babies in it, swimming in it if they have a pool. I don't think under sink systems are the answer here. I think this company should be paying for whole house filtration, which is in the form of granular activated carbon. Whole house filtration is the other option that's provided to people with certain levels of Gen X, and then municipal hookups, which we're finding are extremely difficult, time consuming. There's not a lot of capacity for any of the utilities to manage that. It will take years. So there's a lot of issues with groundwater contamination. If you live in the Fayetteville region and you haven't yet had your well sampled, you can contact DEQ, and I'm happy to provide a phone number in the chat for Michael Scott, the gentleman that is in charge of running that program, for you to call to see where you might be in the scope of the sampling. As well, the Lower Cape Fear, New Hanover, Brunswick, Pender, and Columbus counties, our well owners can call a number to see if they're eligible. You can find that number on our website, caperiverwatch.org/GenX. There's a Lower Cape Fear River sampling program as well as the Fayetteville program. So lots to do. In terms of in situ filtration, we do have, as part of the consent order, some in situ filtration on site. This is kind of new technology that from my understanding, that they've put on site. It is doing some work. This isn't something you can do in your private well, and so that's why the opportunities for filtration have been offered to people, because it is really difficult to clean groundwater.
One thing I would add in these filtration systems that needs to be communicated to the owners is that they do require quite a bit of maintenance, and those filters have to be changed, and that media has to be changed periodically, or they become ineffective and actually can cause more problems if you have a breakthrough of the filter or something like that with concentrated PFAS levels. So it's not a just put it in and forget it type solution. It requires a lot of keeping this.
Absolutely. And the consent order does, if you are somebody in the Fayetteville region who ends up gaining eligibility for filtration, Chemours has to pay for that maintenance for 20 years for the reverse osmosis as well as the GAC. But yeah, these solutions again they're not ideal. This stuff needs to be stopped, being put into the environment to begin with, and then then we go from there. But we keep adding it in. We're going to just continue to be in this land of trying to figure out what the heck to do with it.
We probably have time for one more question. I wanted to make sure that design team teachers had an opportunity if anyone else wanted to ask another question.
Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Yeager. I teach at Topsail High School. So one of my questions is, so we've been piloting these lessons and being located around Wilmington, North Carolina, like my students are very, very much invested in the content. And it sticks with them much better than a lot of other topics that we pursue because it's so real and so relevant. But a lot of teachers across the state, even like science teachers across the state, and I would imagine that extends nationally, because they're not located like in our watershed, they think that this issue isn't necessarily as relevant to them. And then combined with the fact that this is a very like chemistry heavy topic. I mean, it is chemistry, but like there seems to be sort of a barrier with public knowledge versus if you're in the field and you're studying it and really understand it. How would y'all go about like breaking that barrier with the public? What do y'all have any ideas with how we could educate people that can voice themselves on the ballots and who we vote for and pressuring or trying to get legislation passed and positive change made?
I'll jump in on that one. That's a great question. So sad news first is that everyone is contaminated with this. One of the very first cases that happened in Parkersburg, West Virginia, resulted in the largest health study that's ever been conducted on this issue. And it found that every single participant, they couldn't find a control that had clean samples, that had 0 levels of PFOA or PFAS in their blood samples. Even polar bears had it in their blood. So this has contaminated the world at different levels, sure, but this is in all of us at this point. So one positive step that just happened is REI is phasing out all of these toxins in their food and gear. And we're expecting it to follow through all of these other outdoor recreation providers like Dick's Sporting Good and all of those things. We all use those things. And so I'm a waterkeeper. I'm in the water all the time. I've got waterproof gear that I wear all the time. Wouldn't it be great if I could buy a set of waders or a rain jacket that wasn't covered in this toxin? So that is a minor level of exposure compared to, 1,200 parts per trillion coming into my drinking water supply, but it's still a method of exposure. And we don't have access cost. I mean, all the sources that we have that have no PFAS are kind of cost prohibitive to a lot of communities. And so there aren't options that are affordable for people to not expose themselves to these toxins. Teflon pans, we all know that they're in that, and they're cheap and we use them. So there are other routes of exposure that every single person is exposed to and shouldn't be. We have a right to clean, safe, drinkable water, and that right is being taken away.
I agree. I think the issue of, well, not necessarily issue, but the topic of contextualizing PFAS contamination across the board and within all of its appliances is relevant when you're addressing the issue, because it is a very widespread issue with multiple pathways of exposure. And within itself, like Emily said, if you have a certain product like water resistant clothing, the more times you wash it, the more times those like the PFAS have a chance to run off into like whatever water system that drains out from a person's water or washing machine. And so that again can later run off into other like water systems and stuff. So it's more of like a confounding effect when you discuss it. And I think that is important to note as well, just like the multiple pathways of exposure for PFAS and how one part of it can isn't necessarily limited within itself. It can still transfer to other pathways.
I'm just going to jump in, Matt, and I love your question. I think it goes to something that we've struggled with, Emily and I, in this work, is communicating it to the public in a way that they understand, right? And the way that can help them feel like they want to get engaged. And because it is so complex and because you can't see it, it's not like a plastic straw in a turtle's nose. Like that's the easiest outreach on anti-plastic. That turtle with that straw in its nose led to so much work on plastics. And we don't have that. You can't see PFAS. And so it's a struggle that we deal with in this world daily, trying to help people understand this issue and help them feel engaged. And I think breaking it down into some of the things that Emily and Christian were talking about, ways that you can get involved, I mean, there's obviously, you can share things with your students about what PFAS are and what they're doing to the environment. And you can also share what they can do in their homes, like with these exposures, like, fast food packaging, another small win. Several fast food giants, through work of Mind the Stores and other folks like Toxic Free Future that Christian was talking about, are reducing or changing their packaging. These are things that people can say, like they can make phone calls, they can sign petitions, and there's so much out there in the land of Google that you can send your students to in terms of like, how can I get active on PFAS, but also talking to their parents, like, hey, do you need that Teflon pan? It's not ideal because we don't really have anywhere to put it. It has to go in the landfill if they're not going to use it. But, we give out cast iron pans at events sometimes, because it's just a small thing that helps people kind of visualize, and cooking your food on toxic chemicals is another pathway of exposure that people can kind of understand. And so, it's really hard. Like Emily said, REI is going to phase out. It's going to take some years. It's really hard to find products that people can afford. It's really hard to press the public to do something, because this is so massive, and these chemicals have been being produced for 50 years and they've been infused into our society. They're in our dental floss, for crying out loud. I mean, they're in makeup, and they're in so many things that we don't know about, but there's always different ways that regular people can get involved. And I would, be happy to share a lot of that, a lot of these ways with you offline. You can visit our website and Emily's as well, and just kind of look at some of the things that we're forward facing to people. Because, we all have, everyone here in North Carolina that's an advocate has opportunities for public engagement. Lots of events that folks can come out to and learn some things and get active. We had a press conference in Wilmington 2 weeks ago on our lawsuit against the EPA. And it was, we had a court hearing that day, pack the house and pack the overflow house at a court hearing. People they want to do things for this. They just need help figuring out what those things are. So that's kind of me and Emily's work, to help people like you to figure out what those things are and how to help other people get to them. So reach out to your local environmental nonprofits and see what they can do, is what I would suggest there.
Matt, I would jump in on just kind of at a macro level. You'd be surprised how many people just have no understanding of where their water comes from. And so I would suggest any of the teachers out there, reach out to your local utility. We do tours all the time with elementary school kids, high school kids, college students, and it's just a great way to get an understanding of how this all works. The water comes out of the sky and it's collected, and people just don't have an understanding of how that happens, the process that it goes through, and all the things that have to be done to make it safe. And so I think that's kind of a gateway into talking about some of these more acute problems.
I love that. And I'm going to share. So CFPUA is doing tours of their Sweeney facility. They've installed the granular activated carbon system at Sweeney. So you might want to contact CFPUA, see if you can get a tour. That covers
I want to come.
whole...
If you take a field trip, Matt, let me know. We'll be
I
there.
think it's also helpful to share the wins. Like, Dana has done so much amazing work on this settlement, on the consent order, and the REI petition. That was that was all communities that pushed this petition that made a huge retailer change their practices. So there's absolutely momentum for change here. And it's so daunting to think about this giant problem, that this toxin is in everything that we use and we consume it all the time. It's really easy to just get complacent and not take any action, but we have to remind ourselves of those wins, even if they're small. Some of them are huge and we need to celebrate it when we have them.
Oh man, Emily, that's nice. I really like that as our our take-home message tonight. And I think everybody hit at it in their own way. So small wins, and all of us have a place in it, even if it might feel small individually. It sounds like collectively we can start to move the needle. So if you're still here and you are a teacher and you're interested in joining us for this type of work, our small way that we are working on this is through designing some of these lesson plans. You can see Matt, who you just saw in this photo. We are bringing teachers to Chapel Hill this summer to meet with more scientists, to learn some of these lesson plans from the design team teachers that you saw tonight, and to learn how to incorporate the science of PFAS and solutions into your classroom science instruction. Applications are open now. The deadline is March 19th, so that's kind of a short turnaround time, but we'd love to see some more applications roll in, and we'd love to see you this summer as we continue to confront this from, the angle that we have, which is education, and approaching students every day as change makers. We have a lot of funding that helps make this work happen. And we really believe that you all are the change agents, and that your students are the change agents that are going to help to make solutions happen. So thank you all so much for being here. Huge thank you to our panelists for giving us your time, especially in the evening. Christian, I don't know how you made the time, but we're so grateful. And I will send follow-up emails to everyone so that you all can continue to be in touch and we can continue to confront this together. So thank you all so much for being here. I hope everyone has a great rest of your night.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks,
Thank
Jenna.
you.
You.